Mr. President.
Senator from Alaska.
Mr. President, is the Senate in a quorum call?
Yes, it is.
I ask permission that the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
Now, Mr. President, the Senate is debating right now, obviously, a really important issue. It's the confirmation of Judge Kavanaugh. It's a serious, very serious, important debate. It's a contentious debate. A lot of emotions out there, and it's going to continue that way. But I want to talk about something that's not actually related to that. In some ways, it's actually related to something very different. So I heard in the news this morning, actually, Mr. President, I hear this in the news all the time to our friends in the media. This speech that I'm going to give has a little bit about something I want you to focus on, try a little harder in certain areas. But there's a conventional wisdom out there, right? Senate is most contentious it's ever been, hyper-partisanship. Nobody talks to each other. Nobody likes each other. I've heard people talk about 1850 Civil War. Nothing gets done. Now, Mr. President, I'm not a media basher. I walk out and I do my interviews. I'm very open. Back home, I'm open to the media all the time. Great state of Alaska. I'm respectful. You know, I don't see the media as the enemy of the people or anything like that. They certainly have their biases. But I will say, I believe, to some degree, this narrative of, hey, this place is so partisan, haven't seen this since the 1850s, nothing gets done here. In some ways, it is driven by the media. Conflict sells, we know that. Senators fighting and smashing each other. It's kind of interesting to sell newspapers or time on social media. But bipartisan, hard work, the good work for the nation, let's just admit it, Mr. President, can be a bit boring. All right, it can be a bit boring. Wow, these guys are working together, these men and women are working together. That's a little boring in the media space, so it doesn't get written about. Nationally, certainly, or a lot of times locally in some of our home states. And, Mr. President, I think this is a shame. I think it's a shame. Of course, the media can write about the contentious issues. We're seeing a really important one right now, and it deserves a lot of print, a lot of press. It's getting it, that's for sure. But it's a shame because this can be a bit dispiriting, not only for the members of this body, but much more importantly for the people we represent, for the Alaskans I represent, the people we represent. Because they see this and they think, they read the newspaper, like, geez, this is the only thing going on there. So tonight, what I want to do, Mr. President, something a bit of a shocker to some watching. Anyone watching back home? We still have people in the gallery. This is going to be a bit of a shocker. And I'm almost sure no one's going to write about it or do a story about it. But nonetheless, the Alaskans I represent, the American people that we all represent here, they need to hear about it. Because in the past few weeks, heck, in the past few hours, this body right here, the U.S. Senate, has gotten some important bipartisan work done for America. Now, you might not read about it back home, but that doesn't mean it didn't happen. Some of these bills are big, important bills. Some of them are smaller, maybe less important bills. But, Mr. President, they all have something in common. Hard work, good work, serious work, and bipartisan, actually very bipartisan work that will help America address challenges and take advantage of opportunities. Yes, being done right here, today, the last 2, 3, 4 weeks. So, what might some of these accomplishments just in the past few weeks be? Maybe our friends in the media will write about it. I hope they do. So let's get started. Let's talk about some of these. Okay, Mr. President, as you know, we just had a bill that passed the Senate overwhelmingly dealing with the opioids crisis. The President's going to sign this. This is going to his desk. It's a huge issue for all of us. Really important issue in my state, the great state of Alaska. The numbers are staggering. Staggering. 72,000 Americans, rich, poor, black, white, native, non-native, young, old, actually mostly young, 72,000 died of drug overdoses last year. I mean, it's just hard to comprehend. And this body, in my view, is finally waking up to this challenge. Now, I'm not going to go through each one of these bills, but there's going to be significant funding, billions, in this bill we just passed. This bill has my good friend from Ohio, Senator Portman, who's been such a leader on this, has his bill, the STOP Act, which I was an early co-sponsor of, that focuses on stopping the killer drug fentanyl from coming from China and Mexico and killing our people. That's the STOP Act. This bill has a provision that I authored that gets 5% of the funding to Native health organizations, because some of the Native organizations in the lower 48 in Alaska have really strong, far-reaching access to some of our rural citizens. So these organizations are going to see a lot more funding. So there is a hugely important amount of good policy. We're not going to get there. We're not going to fix this opioid heroin addiction problem for years, but at least we're focused on it. And it's good legislation, and it was very bipartisan legislation, and that just passed the Senate. It's going to go to the President's desk for his signature. So that happened today. That's newsworthy. If you're going through recovery, like I know so many good people in Alaska are, this is encouraging news. Hopefully someone's going to write about it. This is encouraging news. Okay, what else happened today? The FAA reauthorization happened. Now, okay, some people are, well, that sounds like a yawner. But this is basic infrastructure. This is basic aviation security, infrastructure, improvements in weather reporting systems. For my state, the great state of Alaska, this bill is enormously important. Enormously important. And I'm not going to read all the provisions in there that are going to benefit Alaska, like essential air service, like more funding for the airport infrastructure, improvement program, like streamlining permitting so you can actually build airport infrastructure. But this is a bill that's going to really help the whole country. And again, we're starting to get work done. From 2008 to 2012, there was 23 extensions of the FAA bill, the Federal Aviation Administration Reauthorization Act. 23 extensions. What does that mean? Well, it essentially means the Senate wasn't doing its job. This is a 5-year extension. People back home in Alaska or other places can plan now for 5 years on infrastructure for airports. No more of these extensions. 23 in 5 years. That's the Senate not doing its job. And we did that today. Now, to some people, this is a really, really big deal. I hope the media will report on it. I'm not holding my breath. But what about this? Very bipartisan, a lot of hard work, important to keep America at the cutting edge of drone technology, of aviation technology. We are the home and the most innovative place in the world for aviation and aircraft. This will help us stay that way. That happened today. That happened today also. That's going to go to the President's desk for signature. Bipartisan, important for the country. Related to that, Mr. President, and I know you've been a leader in this issue, on our budget and appropriations process that with the enactment of the Department of Defense appropriations bill, this Senate has had more spending bills enacted on time since any time since 1997. 20 years. Now, I know a lot of people are like, well, that's really boring. And isn't that what you're supposed to do? Pass appropriations bills? Get them to the president's desk so you don't have these giant omnibuses? That's Washington speak for a bill that's $1.5 trillion, 2,400 pages that nobody reads because nobody knows what's in it. I don't vote for those, by the way. That system was broken. A bunch of us ran for the Senate, actually, in 2014 because we thought the system was so broken, we're going to start to work on it. And we're doing it. Success. We have a long way to go. And again, if you're watching and the American people say, well, big deal, you're funding the government in the way you're supposed to. You have a really good point. But we hadn't been doing that for almost 2 decades. And we're starting to do it in a serious way. By the way, it has to be bipartisan here in the Senate because it's 60 votes that we need for these appropriations bills. So the Appropriations Committee has passed out every bill, as I mentioned, at a pace that we haven't seen since 1998. Almost 90% of the discretionary spending that runs our federal government is done through the regular order, the process by which most Americans think we should be doing things, but we haven't been, but now we're starting to do it. Bipartisan, important, get our budgeting process back in order. We're doing that. That's good news. Probably not going to hear about it in the media, but that's good news. Let me give you another one that's related. About 5 weeks ago, now I'm going a little bit further back, the National Defense Authorization Act, the NDA. I sit on the Armed Services Committee like the presiding officer. This is a really important bill. The President signed it about a month ago. It rebuilds our military, which the vast majority of Americans, certainly the vast majority of Alaskans, support. People forget from 2010 to 2016, the Department of Defense budget was cut by almost 25%, despite serious national security challenges all over the world. We were cutting defense spending dramatically. Readiness plummeted. This bill the President just signed significantly rebuilds our military and implements the National Defense Strategy of the Pentagon written by Secretary Mattis. That's a whole new strategy for America. Yes, we still have the threat from al-Qaeda and international terrorism from 9/11, but this strategy starts to say our big challenges are the rise of great power rivalries like China and Russia, and we need to focus on them primarily. And that's what we're doing. Guess how many senators voted for that? A hugely important piece of legislation. 85. Very bipartisan. One of the most important things this body does, I checked, most major newspapers didn't even write about it when the President signed it. That's really important. Bipartisan, rebuilding the military, new strategy. So that's good news. In my state, that's really good news. The vast majority of Alaskans who love our military, support our military, we have a lot of military bases, they think this is great news. So, I hope our friends in the media write about that. I know it's about 4 weeks late, but I didn't see any articles on it. That's important. Let me give you a few other ones, Mr. President. They're not like the NDAA, huge in terms of their importance or the size of the bill, but they're important. They're bills that I authored, so I like to highlight those. When you get a bill that you work with your colleagues here on both sides of the aisle, you pass it, you get it over to the President, he signs it. This week, the bill that Senator Whitehouse and I, Democrat from Rhode Island, have been working on for, almost 2 years, the Save Our Seas bill. which is all about addressing the challenge that we have, not only in America, but globally, with ocean debris, ocean pollution, ocean plastics, littering our oceans, hurting our wonderful sustainable fisheries, potentially posing health risks to humans. That bill passed this week. It's going to be signed by the President, hopefully this week or next week. I want to thank Senator Whitehouse, Senator Booker. Very bipartisan bill. Pass here, pass the House. Really important issue. By the way, the Trump administration is doing a good job on this issue. Even the U.S., Mexico, Canada, NAFTA agreement has a provision. We're pressing for that on this ocean debris problem. But this bill is going to do a lot to help in this challenge. And it passed. Bipartisan group of senators strongly supported that. Passed this week, being signed into law here soon by the President. Good news. Pretty sure no one wrote about it, but if you look at global challenges for the environment, the ocean pollution, plastics, ocean debris challenge is a big one. In this body, and again, I want to thank Senator Whitehouse in particular, great leadership on this issue. We're taking important strides on this, and he and I are already working on SOS 2.0. And I guarantee you that's going to pass. So, bipartisan achievement, protecting our oceans, getting the world to clean up plastics, ocean debris. It's not bad for 1 week in the Senate, right? So, hopefully someone will write about that. Very bipartisan, that's for sure. Let me give you another one, Mr. President. This was signed into law, I think 3 weeks ago. This was a bill that really important to me. It's one of the first bills I introduced as a senator when I came here 3.5 years ago. It's called the Pro Bono Work to Empower and Represent Act, the POWER Act. That's what it's called, the POWER Act. This is a bill that I worked with very closely with Senator Heidkamp, Democrat from North Dakota. She and I worked on this bill for, over 2 years. Passed the Senate, finally passed the House, came back, had a couple more elements to it. We got it passed again. President signed it 3 weeks ago. What's the POWER Act do? Well, we all know America has big challenges with regard to sexual assault and domestic violence. My state has huge problems with this horrible, horrendous issue. The POWER Act, through getting lawyers to step up and help victims and survivors of domestic violence, is going to provide much more legal resources and services to victims of domestic violence and sexual assault. That's a pretty important topic, pretty important issue for America. Think about this. If you're an accuser, if you're someone who is a perpetrator of one of these horrendous crimes, right, a sexual assault kind of crime, you get a Sixth Amendment right to counsel. That's under the Constitution. If you're the victim, you get nothing. Nothing. Well, our bill, which is now the law of the land, is going to help change that. We envision an army of lawyers all over the country helping these survivors. So that passed, bipartisan, 3 weeks ago. Important issue, certainly for Alaska, but for the country, we all know that. We can do so much better in this area. So that's going to help. I think it's going to help thousands of survivors, personally, as we work to implement it. But that's good news, bipartisan. What else, Mr. President? NAFTA. Now, this isn't in the Senate yet, but it'll be coming our way. The President and his team announced that they have reached agreement with Mexico and Canada on an updated NAFTA agreement. Well, I think most Americans think that that's very important. We'll see if it's bipartisan. I certainly have been one who's been encouraging the President and his team on working hard on making sure we get there and address some of our other economic challenges and trade challenges. But that was just announced a couple days ago. That's good news. That's good news. We got to get to the details of it. We'll debate it here on the Senate floor, but that's important for the country, for our allies, for the American worker, and American families. But that's positive. And then related to NAFTA, of course, is bipartisan good news that should make every American smile. And that is finally, we are once again unleashing the might of the U.S. economy. Something that the presiding officer I know cares a lot about. And certainly, that's a bipartisan issue. We'd rather have 4.2% GDP growth like we had last quarter than 1.5% GDP growth, which was the average over the last 10 years. Now, there's a debate here. It's a healthy debate on what's causing this robust economic growth. I think it's tax reform, regulatory reform, unleashing the promise and power of American energy. So there's a debate here, but there's no debate on the fact that everybody in this body, I hope, thinks that 4.2% GDP growth, thinks having the lowest unemployment rate in almost 50 years, thinks having wages finally start to go up after being stagnant for 20 is good news. It is good news. And everybody here should have bipartisan agreement on that. How we sustain it, how we keep it going, we'll debate that. But nobody debates that that's good news. Bipartisan good news. So, Mr. President, I'm just going to ask my friends in the media, it's not 1850. Sorry, I know that conflict sells. We're not on the verge of civil war. We don't all hate each other. We actually like each other. We work together. I certainly respect my colleagues here. Yeah, we have our tough debates. We're having one right now. But for my friends in the media, it's okay to report on bipartisan successes. I just gave an example in the last 4 to 5 weeks of a number of them. A number of them that are actually really good for the American people. They're good for the people I represent back home in Alaska. So, but even if you're not going to read about this or see it on TV, for anyone watching, for the people in the gallery, for my constituents back home, there is a lot going on here that's bipartisan, that's significant, that helps us address challenges like opioids, helps us take advantage of industries like the aviation industry, which for Alaska is so important. So, keep the faith. Keep the faith. And again, to my colleagues in the media, my friends in the media, it's okay to report on bipartisan successes that the American people care about. You might not care about them, but the American people do. So let's work together and try to make sure everybody's understanding that there's some important work being done here, and a lot of it is going to help the people we represent. I yield the floor.